My name is Donna. I think you know who I am, Donna Backstrom McCoy. I leave all the names because I want people to understand Spielman from Dubuque and all the work I've done against LHTBM has been under the name Donna Spielman Backstrom. I've remarried Larry McCoy, and so that's my most important name. But for this event, I go by Donna Backstrom very often. So we have 3 speakers here. This is Anna Peck, Pastor Anna Peck, who will start us with an opening prayer. And then I'll probably start the ball rolling. And then we have Klauer and Aaron Smith-Levin. So I'll share a little more about each one as I introduce them in a little while. We are being video recorded, so try not to tape or take pictures so that we don't interfere with that process. And as each of us speaks, they'll let you know if you'll take questions during. As I speak, feel free to interrupt with Q&A. I'm fine with that, okay? So, Anna, would you please start us in prayer?
I invite us to pray. Dearest Lord God, we thank you for your promise to be with us always. Thank you that you are with us at this time and in this place. In our seminar today, we give you our hearts, our minds, and our lives. Come, speak your words of life into our beings. Help us become better informed about the dangers of higher control groups, both for others and ourselves. We pray for those with thoughts about joining such a group, that they have a change of mind and heart. We pray for those already in such a group, that they too would have a change of mind and heart and be able to break free from their bondage. We pray for families torn apart, that they will someday be reunited in your love and grace. Thank you for our speakers, and we ask that you bless them in their presentations. Donna McCoy, John Klauer, and Aaron Smith-Levin. We pray for all these things, trusting that you are our wise counselor, our perfect teacher, and our faithful friend. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Okay, this number. Does anybody know what that number means? Jim. Exactly. It has been more than 4,710 days since I have seen my niece, Juanita Robinson. She is in the Love Holy Trinity Blessed Mission, a cult headquartered in Chicago. But it's a very difficult thing to explain. When I say the primary group is in this area of Dubuque, Iowa, western Wisconsin, and parts of Illinois. So we have Joanne and Jim. Jim, is your mom here? Marge? Okay. This is Juanita's grandma over here, Marge Robinson. It has been that long for her also, since she has seen her granddaughter. And Marge, if you want to share a little later, you're welcome to. If you choose not to, that is perfectly fine as well, okay? I think you have a fabulous story of the last time you saw Juanita before she went to Chicago. If you want to share that, that would be awesome. You let me know. And then we have Juanita's brother, Joe Robinson, and his fiancée, Amy Waters. And Joe would kind of like his sister to be at his wedding this fall. Imagine that. And we have tried, several of us have tried, and to no avail thus far anyway. And then my son, John Backstrom, is here with his wife, Amy. So that's really cool. And he's been with me through all of this, all the years of fighting against this cult and everything. So he's certainly in the loop on pretty much everything. And yes, I've gone to him for advice as well. So what's the big deal? So my primary concern remains that this cult is contrary to the core Christian belief that we are saved by grace through faith in Christ Jesus. That means it's not about how many rosaries you say a day. It's not about saying the Love Holy Trinity prayer 12 times a day, going to Mass every day, etc. And those are all their little rules. They've got many, many of them. And I'm sure John will share some of those probably. But the essence is we are saved by grace. If we're Christians, we do believe that. This, I won't spend a lot of time on. This is actually just taken from dictionary.com. Well, what is a cult, okay? Particular system of religious worship, especially with reference to its rites and ceremonies. The picture you saw at the beginning gives you an idea of Love Holy Trinity's rites and ceremonies, and they're all specific to that cult. And the thing I hope you can take away with you today is that a cult is a cult is a cult. They all have different names, but the essence of them is the same. And family disassociation is the common denominator. An instance of great veneration of a person, ideal, or thing, especially as manifested as a body of admirers. So, Jim, let me ask you, who's the key player in Love Holy Trinity Blessed Mission? Yep, Agnes Q. MacDonald, a Korean woman who was a Buddhist, who became a Catholic because apparently she sat on God's lap and he told her to become a Catholic and get a group of people to follow her. So, while I find that tremendously humorous, it's equally sad that people believe that, okay? And I think it's also very important, Aaron and I really agree solidly on all of this, that understand this could happen to anyone. This is not, oh, well, she was foolish to join that or this, you know, or you hear, well, my daughter would never join. Yeah, they could, and yeah, they would. It's, you know, you probably, I know there are some people here today who have been to a few of the meetings, but they saw the red flags, so they didn't continue with the group. And kudos to you for being in touch and following, you know, probably the best advice I could give anybody is to question everything. Absolutely question everything. You need to have transparency in the group. In 2005, the Catholic Church finally came out in Dubuque and said, okay, this group is not approved by the Catholic Church. This, however, was after the Catholic Church allowed this group for how long? I'm not sure. Jim, you might help me out there too. Right, in terms of that. But in terms of actually when they started at the local parishes, it was several years. The Catholic Church allowed them to hold meetings in the local parishes, local Catholic retreat houses, etc. What did that do? Why is that a concern? It gave them legitimacy. It made them look like they were part of the Catholic Church, even though they were not at that time vetted by the Catholic Church. So they're talking, the part I like is characteristics of a cult in that statement. It is not approved. And all Catholic faithful are cautioned against participation in and association with this group. Clergy and others in church leadership are not to support or endorse LHTBM. Does anybody have any comment on that, on what you see in your local parish? If not, that's fine. Yes.
There are people who belong to this cult who worship with us weekly.
Correct. And several of the parishes, I'm speaking to Nativity Parish especially, have several cult members on the altar giving out communion, acting as sacristans. They're on the altar in a position of authority. Whoops, I'm sorry. I'm probably blocking the very lights that are taping me. So sorry. But anyway, yes, I'm a dork. Anyway, that's absolutely right. They're there, and according to the bishop, it's, well, we can't have them not be on the altar. And my response back is, why not? Those are my two favorite words. Why not? So you can probably tell my relationship with the Catholic Church is not good, and it's my choice because I've worked a lot with Cardinal George, who has now passed away in Chicago, as well as the local cardinals. And they feel canonically they have done everything they can to stop this group. There are many more things they need to do. There are things they could be doing, small things, counseling for the families. I have a list a mile long, the things they could and should be doing. we had some great coverage. Thank you to the Telegraph Herald, definitely. And my favorite, absolutely favorite one was they had to go to the group for comments. And of course, there were no calls returned from Marilyn and Dick Vogt or from the Chicago headquarters of Love Holy Trinity Blessed Mission. But they also went to the communications director for the Archdiocese of Dubuque, who said, we continue to encourage local Catholics to avoid association with Love Holy Trinity Blessed Mission. So when I read that, first of all, that made it all worthwhile. This was fabulous. This is what I want. Only I've told all of them I would like to see this issued at least annually so people understand it is not approved. They have never applied to be approved, etc. In spite of what they have told many of the newspapers locally, they have not applied to be a religious order. This is very text heavy. I don't think I'll go through all of it, but the reason is, the whole idea here is, this is about high control groups and awareness of. These are characteristics associated with cultic groups. Dr. Michael Langone is the head of ICSA, International Cultic Studies Association, and they're kind of my punch in the arm, my shot in the arm when I think nobody gets what I'm trying to say or do. When I go to their conferences, I come back knowing that, yep, never question again, just don't question. But we'll take this, I'll go through these rather quickly, but if anybody has questions or, we will discuss, just jump right in there. The group displays excessively zealous and unquestioning commitment to its leader, whether dead or alive, and regards the belief system, ideology, and practices as the truth, as law. Does anybody see that in any group? Yeah, exactly. Questioning, doubt, and dissent are discouraged or even punished. I've talked to many people, several ex-members who have told me that, and they say you do not question Keel, and you do not question her spiritual advisors. Overall, Agnes Keel McDonald wants to be everyone's spiritual advisor, but has several other people that she, I hate to use those words, but allows to do that on her behalf. Mind-altering practices, such as meditation, chanting, etc., are used in excess and serve to suppress doubts about the group and its leader. The next one is pretty obvious. The leader dictates, what they can and cannot do, basically. The group is elitist. This hits absolutely every cult I've ever read about, claiming a special exalted status for itself, its leaders, or the leader is on a special mission to save humanity. Always they are the only group. And Aaron and I talked about this at dinner last night, and how did you put it, Aaron? Something about the mathematics are way off, because it's like, okay, if every group thinks you're the only one that's going to make it to heaven, hello, there's something very wrong with this picture. So, and they do. Everyone thinks that they have the only solution. And Marge, I don't know if you want to share your story or not. You tell me. You just as soon not. That's just fine. Jim, do you want to share it for her? Or not? Joanne? No. Okay. Do you want to take a microphone down, please? Thank you. Thank you. Good job, Aaron. Thanks. Whoa. Whoa. It's all good. It's all good. He's okay. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Thanks for not getting hurt, Aaron.
Before Nita left, she was really saying her goodbyes then, and she did stop at my mom and dad's house, and she came in and told us that we were of the world, evil of the world, and that was the only way to get to heaven was through this group, LH, Love Holy Trinity Blessed Mission. And I kind of remember my dad even said to her, asked Nita what was the fourth commandment of our faith. It was to love thy mother and father. And my dad asked her, he says, well, how are you following the fourth commandment here? And so I can't remember what she said. I heard what she said, but anyhow, she said her goodbyes, and it basically said that we were the evil of the world, and that she was on the right path to get to heaven, that we'd never get there. So that basically was what happened.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, basically told Grandma and Grandpa, to whom she was incredibly close prior to that time, told them that essentially they would not go to heaven because they are not following their path, the path of the mission. This is not exclusive to Love Holy Trinity. Every cult thinks that they are the only path to God. So again, that's your red flag. If you go to any meeting anywhere, you have to be thinking, wait, that's not possible. That this group and that group, who's right? You know, it's just not possible.
And one other thing that even when we went to Mass that day, the day she left, I believe it was the 14th of May, and she came up and we said our goodbyes, and I guess, they told us at that point in time that we'd be able to see her in 2 or 3 months. She needed to be able to discernment, and then we'd be able to have contact with her. But that was one of our lies of the group. There were several lies the group has made. That was one of them.
Thank you for sharing that. You see, you give Jim a microphone, you see what happens. That's awesome. Thank you. Keep it, because I'll probably need you again or want you to share again. Yeah, that's absolutely right, And Jim addressed the lie situation. I'll be touching on that in a little bit, and feel free to share more, Jim. Let's see, we'll go down. Okay, the second to last bullet. The group has a polarized us versus them mentality, which may cause conflict with the wider society. May cause conflict. Yeah, it will. It really will. And they do see it. We're right, you're wrong. We're going to heaven, you will not. That is so ingrained in them. That is what they believe with the essence of their beings. And the last one is great here. The leader is not accountable to any authorities, unlike, for example, teachers, military commanders, etc., priests, monks, and rabbis of mainstream religious denominations. And what do you have? Everyone has a boss. When you work at the office, you have a boss. And when Keogh talked to, Monsignor James Barta here with the Archdiocese of Dubuque, this is back in the 2005 era, and she told him that she reports to the Holy Trinity. And his comment was, that's a pretty big jump right there, And so you have to look and listen to that. Again, those have to be red flags for you. And don't freak at all the text. Carol, I tried, but it was like, I had to put this in because this is the essence of the meeting. So the group teaches or implies that its supposedly exalted ends justify whatever means may be necessary. Okay, and so this is where we would get into a little bit of that cognitive dissonance. Okay, Marilyn I don't believe at all, was a liar in her past life. At some point, she began lying for the group, even told my brother that, well, there are times I have to lie to protect our group. So the conflict there is, you don't lie, you do lie. You're going to go one way or the other. She chose to stay with the group, and we see the path of where there are many, many mistruths spoken, which is very, very sad, and very, it's not the way we were raised, I assure you that. Subservience to the leader, requires members to cut ties with family and friends. Again, we see that in our life. We see that pretty much with every cult. And man, oh man, that's a gut-wrenching situation. And radically alter the personal goals and activities they had before joining the group. Juanita wanted to have babies, didn't she, Joanne? She wanted to be a mom, have many children. Got caught up in this, where she thinks she's becoming a sister in the Catholic Church. She's not. She's absolutely not. However, she thinks she is, so it is, what she thinks is her reality. Members are encouraged or required to live and socialize only with other group members. We see that as well. And we've seen that, Ginger, you and I talk about this one a lot, how Marilyn used to have a life outside of the group, and we watched as slowly but surely You know, I don't want to say day after day, but certainly year after year, she was more drawn into the cult to where I don't, honest to God, think she can function totally in real society without having her cult members near her. And I can't read the last one, so we're cool with that. Okay, now, my red flags. Okay, this picture on the left, the reason I'm showing you that is not so much for who the people are, but what they're wearing. And they have their robes and all this that sets them apart. Dick Vogt is far left, so you can't tell that. I know that. Marilyn is next to him. There are other locals in that group. But if you notice, all of the garb they're wearing goes back to their rites, all of the things they do as part of that cult. The picture to the right is the young children. They have outfits for things like this, the matching black, and then the adults have matching black when they go to a funeral. But it's not just black, it's like they're actually outfits that they wear. So, because I am the dark side, so you wait, I am the dark side. This is what they call me. So, detachment from and destruction of family. My red flags. These are my red flags in the beginning. Lack of transparency. I would ask Marilyn, well, where will Juanita live? What about this? Every response was, I don't know. And it's like, no. See, if you have nothing to hide, you will respond to phone calls. You will respond to emails. You will respond to questions. You want transparency in a solid group, in a true group, because you want people to know that here, we have nothing to hide. Reporting line, the Holy Spirit, I shared a little bit about that. Buzzwords, every cult has buzzwords. Persecution, evil, contaminated, dark side. So Marilyn says that I have contaminated my family. Quite honestly, if none of my siblings or anyone agreed with me, I would be up here today doing the same seminar. Okay, understand that about me, that I would be here no matter what. So it's not about contaminating anyone. I live a certain way, it stands for itself. Dark side, you'll see an email where Marilyn calls me the dark side. And I just, you look at that, I see humor in it. It's kind of those, but you want to laugh because it's also sad, you just want to cry. Everything about this is sad. But we do laugh. Just a couple photos. This is my family, my mom and dad, the 5 kids with a nun who we cannot figure out who that nun is. If anybody knows her, let me know. But the 7 of us, raised in the Catholic Church, Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, Catholic all the way. And I have just a couple photos of Juanita here. Christmas 1999, to show you, not a freak. She's in a cult, but she's not a freak. A normal young girl. There she is, college, circa early 2000s. Beautiful young lady, college graduation. And now the question is, where in the world is she? So we hadn't seen her, still haven't, almost 13 years, 4,700 days late, 10 days later. And I've done a lot of investigative work about the cult, maybe that's the best way to put it, but I created a lot of networking, a lot of contacts with people in Chicago, and I knew where they lived at one point in this house, and I asked this young man across the street if he would take photos. If you see any humans, start taking pictures. Email me the pictures. I have no idea who you might see. Email me, though. I want to see what my niece, if she's okay. That's the only way we could see. So the next day, I swear to God, the next day, I got these pictures in the email. That's my niece. He saw her that next day. So this was 2009. We had not seen her since 2005. Because of this, we knew she was alive, working, figured out certain things from these photos. But again, you have to keep it alive. You have to keep working at it. But people are amazing in terms of helping. I've made so many cold calls. Would you do this? Would you do that? They have no idea who in God's name I am. They do it because they want to help. They think it's wrong that people cannot see their families. Okay. Jim, I'm going to have you help a little here. The quote we get from Marilyn to my brother and to anyone in the newspapers, etc. Juanita is free to leave whenever she wants. And you can insert any name you want there, okay? And I'm saying, Not so fast, Kimosabe. It is not the truth. Down here, you guys can't read this, but she's talking about, this is a letter Juanita sent in 2005 to her parents, and Marilyn has written remember on the envelope that she sent in 2006. You don't have to worry about any of that, but the essence is, over here, she's asking her parents. First of all, Marilyn and Dick obviously wrote this letter. When you know your niece, right, Jim? Yeah, it's all their words. And they're talking about, send this letter to everybody that you said anything negative about LHTBN. Send that, and then maybe you can see your daughter. What is that? Blackmail. That's emotional blackmail. This again, text heavy, I'm just going to read a couple things. Marilyn told my brother Chuck, Joanne knows what she needs to do, write those letters, in order to see her daughter. You don't even want to know what I think that is. I mean, that's just absolutely unbelievable. We actually did try to get the family into some counseling. This was probably early 2005, I think it was. And I suggested we talk to a priest, but a third-party priest. Marilyn would only do it if we went to Jim Dubert, who is a Catholic priest who's part of the cult. So no, we did not do it. But we talked to Dubert. This is probably too long of a story, and I want to keep us moving. But point is, Dubert actually told people, well, no, Joanne and Jim are not allowed in there to see their daughter in Chicago. Chuck, welcome home. Heard you had a great contaminating trip. We pray for you all. This is Marilyn's email. In 2010, we took a siblings trip to Florida, and that's what she's talking about, the contamination. This family would be healed if everyone turned to God instead of the dark side. And remember, I'm the dark side. Absolutely unbelievable, the text used and everything. It's just mind-boggling again. And we all know Joanne promised Juanita that she'd support her decision, blah, blah. So we know who caused it. So this is going back to the blackmail, emotional blackmail. A lot of people think of blackmail as financial, but the emotional is every bit as dangerous and deadly. And then down here at the end, she's talking about me contaminating. She's wasted tons of time and money these past 5 years for absolutely nothing. We pray she soon recognizes that. Well, you know what? I have spent tons of time and tons of money since 2004 working against this cult. But I assure you, it's not for absolutely nothing. Okay? That's why we're here today. And then brainwashing is the term you use a lot. You hear it a lot with cults, not so much in today's world of therapy, but it kind of gives you an idea. The fear-driven process that essentially causes a type of freezing of people's cognitive ability, or what we call dissociation, in relation to the system or relationship that is doing the brainwashing. Absolutely. If you look at cults, any cult, they're fear-driven. They're not God-driven, they are fear-driven. If you don't do this, this will happen. If you don't do that, that will happen. Process of isolation, intimidation, indoctrination. And it's not about telling some people stuff that's not true until they simply start to believe it. It twists the control dials at a far deeper level than that. It's not about the beliefs, but about the system. This part is really for people who have any history with Love Holy Trinity, maybe friends, family, whatever. They would always try to say that Len Cruz was the national director. We all know it's Keogh. Do you guys remember, Jim, the time where, what did they say? Keogh is nothing but ashes, right? They tried to minimize her role, that it's part of the Catholic Church, Len Cruz, blah, blah. But you see it on their retreat schedules. Guess what? It's Keogh's schedule. You're going to be talking to Keogh. You're not talking to Lenny Cruz. Some photos. My brother-in-law, Dick Vogt, and he's never happy to see me. I don't understand, but he's just never happy to see me. Len Cruz, the cult's priest, and Marilyn Vogt. Once the church said, no, this is not approved by the Catholic Church, Marilyn told my brother again, he will always be our priest. So do you understand the difference? They might go to a Catholic church. They are not Catholic. They are saying very simply, he's our priest. You know where their loyalty is. And different people in here have talked to me about a little bit of that this morning, and they see that, they understand that. And then you've got the logo, the different logo. Again, that goes back to, if you look at some of the red flags, most people don't do that, okay? Run around with their own kind of clothing, etc. This is just here for some humor. I'm sorry, but it was in the notes, and these are notes from an ex-member, and I'm like, wow, just wow. What does a cult leader look like? Okay, this is probably my favorite. That's Agnes Q. MacDonald, cult leader, another Catholic priest who used to go to her retreats. My favorite thing to talk about is there are monsters in this world, and very often they look like you and me, okay? So you look at the monsters, the priests who have abused children, ministers who have abused children. When you work with children of sex abuse victims, how often is it not the family who's doing the abusing? So there are monsters everywhere, but they look like you and me. And I think that's really important to understand. It goes back to question everything. More faces of a cult. My sister Marilyn. This was at a meeting in Belvedere when they tried to get a hospital there, buy a hospital, but they were not allowed to buy it. Yeah. Thank you. Jim, you've got the mic. Do you want to follow that? Thanks.
Are there priests who are listed or pictured who are no longer supporting the cult?
The one I just saw, the priest I just saw, I don't think is. I don't know, though, because it's so underground. Are there other priests that are still part of it? Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Why are these priests allowed to stay in the priesthood if they're supporting the cult?
Ding, ding, ding. That's my question. This is why it goes back to I don't have a really sweet relationship with the Catholic Church. You'll see pictures of Tom Mcandrew, he's a retired priest locally, who is very active. Not so much now, he's in ill health, but the last years, and let's face it, 2005 until a couple years ago. And he actually showed up at one of the hearings that the city of Bellevue had, or Belvedere, thank you, Jim, Belvedere had, and he saw me in the hall and he says, "You are not a believer." And I said, "Oh, absolutely not in your little cult." I said, "I believe in God, but not your little group." I was told then, I called the Vicar General the next day, why was he there? You guys have issued your statement, why was he there? I was told because he's retired, it's very difficult to deal with him because the pension is there and there's not much they can do. I don't accept that response, but that is what I was told. The other ones, I'm sure, are unknown to the bishops. They participate on the side, but they would defend the group if asked. And so that's a great question. Why indeed? Why indeed? They shouldn't be just told. At some point after you continually support it, you should no longer be able to, right, be a priest. Absolutely, totally agree. Wholeheartedly. I'll pass by that guy. Okay, so here's a cool little story. I think it's cool anyway. This picture, all right, those of you who know some of the names, Rosie Riker was one of the pseudo-nuns who knew my niece very well in Chicago, and she passed away the end of, I think it was August 2016. At her funeral, these photos were there, and I wondered, I spoke with a young lady whose parents, basically from Chicago, gave up their home, turned it back to the bank, and joined, knowing that they could no longer be a married couple, but he would be a brother, she would become a sister in the Love Holy Trinity Blessed Mission. So I emailed the child, I've got everything scratched out, and I said, I think I have a picture of your dad, but I don't know. Would you like me to send you the picture? And she said, yes, please. I did. And she wrote back, that is my dad. Her dad is the one in the lighter green shirt here in the pew to the far left. And she said something about, thank you for letting me see my dad, whom I have not seen in 9 years. So for her, again, another photo, 9 years since she has seen her parents, and that was back in 2016. She has a grandchild, at least one, that they've never seen, no desire. Their commitment is to the group, not to the family. Okay, this is from Steve Eichel, president of ICSA, International Cultic Studies Association. And I'll go through this quickly, but that would be Dick Vogt. It's blurry photo, but it gives you the idea how close he is. Understand that physically close in this photo, you have to understand he's very tight in the leadership, he and Marilyn, okay? Beware of any kind of pressure. Yeah, you know, you have to hurry up and do this now. You have to do it now. Be wary of any leader who proclaims him or herself as having special powers or special insight. And this ties right into some of the other characteristics of a cult. The group is closed. So in other words, although there may be outside followers, there's usually an inner circle. Absolutely, we have an inner circle in this cult that maintains the leader without question, follows that leader without question, maintains a tremendous amount of secrecy. The group uses deceptive means typically to recruit new members. And then we talk about, typically cults also exploit their members, mostly financially. And the very important aspect is they often, that if you leave a cult, horrible things will happen to you. And we've heard other people who've left say, you know, they walk away with that fear that terrible things will happen to them. So don't give up hope, would be my, what time is it, Aaron? Oh God, okay, I should have cut. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. So don't give up hope. Beneficial changes in your loved one may occur because of events that have nothing to do with your actions. You know, that growing disillusionment. They always, what I've learned at ICSA is that they all have doubts, just like you and I have doubts, you know, did I marry this, did I make a good choice in marrying this guy or whatever, you know? Did I pick the right college? Did I do this right? We all have some doubts, and cult members do too. Here's a great book, and this stuff, I'll get this posted on my website and everything, but just don't give up hope. And seriously, don't give up hope. Converts become aware of inconsistencies, contradictions, abuses, or failed predictions within the group. Aaron, we talked about this at dinner last night, how, you know, you have that conflict. It's like, well, this is kind of weird, and then you try to make sense in your own mind, but then, you know, once you realize, once you're out of it, it's like, whoa. And then normal cognitive dissonance processes combined within the group pressures. You search for those rationalizations to explain away the disturbing discrepancies. So many disturbing discrepancies accumulate that, as one ex-member put it, the shelf of rationalization on which they were placed collapses. So people do leave, but for our family, it's extremely complicated and more compounded by the fact that Marilyn and Dick Vogt are two of the leaders, okay? That's one of our biggest issues. These are just quotes, and I'm going to zip by those. Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. I live and die by that. You cannot go wrong if you live and die by that. Nothing is sacred. Question everything. Research. Know what and who you're up against. Recognize a cult is a cult is a cult. Some things differ, but most have much in common. Share. Knowledge is power. Share it and speak. Silence is complicity. If not you, who? And keep it alive. The reason I do this today is to keep it alive. I want everyone to know that cult is out there. Families are still damaged, destroyed. It's out there. And get rid of the elephant in the room. Talk about it, for God's sake. In my family, most of the times, for many of my family members, it's like, oh, don't say anything about Juanita. It's like, yeah, talk about her. We love her. She's with us. Get rid of the elephant. No one is above suspicion. And there we go. And that's a little humor to end this one, but it's like, I swear to God, I live and die by that as well. Nothing is sacred. Question everything. So there we go. That's mine. Silence is complicity. Any questions on, yes?
You talk about people leaving. How hard is it for them to leave? Do they just walk out the door, or do they?
No. Right, I can share two stories, one of each. One lady, and she might have some, Jan Imhoff is her name. She was in local, yeah, okay, you know the name. She actually snuck out, basically, had her daughter come get her and take her out of Princeton. There's more to the story, but that's the essence of how she physically left. And someone else basically left And the idea there was that someone drove her home. It was that simple. But you have to realize her dad is still in it big time. He's one of the brothers, so to speak, in the cult. So again, easier for her, okay, in that he would be there to support that move. Whereas, let's say Juanita kind of wanted to go, Meryl and Dick are going to be there. No, they won't say that, but in their own way, they will convince her, absolutely not. That's not an option, So, and when they say these people are free to leave, I think, ultimately that's true, but they're not telling you about the mind control they have on that person, right? They've brainwashed that person so that they believe, well, my parents don't love me. Nothing is important of the world. My life was not important before this group. So it's kind of true what they say, but how did we come to that point, right? Yeah. Any other questions?
Weren't they located outside of Bellevue at one time? And why are they still there, or have they left them back to college?
Okay, in Bellevue, there was a farm owned by Marilyn and Dick Vogt. Marilyn and Dick Vogt deeded it over to the group for $1. I forget how many acres, but Bellevue said, no, we don't want you. So they could not get the zoning request that they needed to open a center in Bellevue. They turned around and sold that property for just under $1 million. So that was the value of the property my sister and brother-in-law donated. So no, they are not in Bellevue at all. But that's because the city said, no, absolutely not. We don't want you here. Anything else? Oh, okay, that's cool. Thank you. Next speaker, my dear friend John Klauer, and he will speak about Love Holy Trinity Blessed Mission.
Thank you. First off, for those of you who might be wondering why I'm all dressed up, I told my wife this morning when I was leaving that this had to do with real estate. I'm a realtor, so I had to wear this. And to make sure that I'm not telling a lie, if any of you want to buy or sell a house, I'm available.
Nice.
Now, my connection, if you can call it that, with LHTBM started when my wife decided that she wanted to join what she called a prayer group at St. Joseph the Worker Church, which is where we were members at the time. And I had no problems with it. It's a prayer group. I've heard of those. Lots of people get together, they pray. And I knew some of the people that were allegedly involved in it. And then we became aware of a function called Unity Masses, which were held down at the Holy Family Church down by the monastery. And they were kind of fun. I enjoyed going there. Good food, and sit through a mass, which was usually fairly short, and have good food and a lot of people running around having fun. And I've got to relate one funny thing that happened at one of those before I get into the main gist of this. Many of the people there were Orientals, and they prepared the food at this one particular meal. My son Nick, God love him, he was a wonderful son. He died a few years ago, but he loved Oriental food, loved it. So we went through the line, and he heaped his plate full and got back to the table, took a big bite. And if you've never seen smoke coming out of a person's ears, picture it, just like in the cartoons. This food that he had gotten was Szechuan, extremely hot. My son had never begged for anything before, like water or pop or anything else. He begged for my pop that day and gulped it literally in one gulp. Funniest thing I've ever seen. Anyway, getting back to this, I heard my wife talking occasionally about Keogh, Agnes Keogh MacDonald. The first time I met her was at a funeral, and I didn't really meet her. I saw her there. She did not deem me worthy to be met. But she came into the funeral for my brother-in-law's dad, Norb Imhoff, and walked in, went right up to Mike and said a few words to him and Jan Imhoff, of course. Jan is my sister-in-law, although I don't brag about it. And ignored the person in the casket, which was Mike's dad, talked to them for a couple minutes, and then went around and talked to somebody else and left. And I don't know that she ever did look at Nora laying in the casket. But my first thought was, well, what in the hell is the big deal with this woman? You know, she's extremely rude and inconsiderate. First off, she barged in front of other people. And then she ignored the person that the wake was supposed to be honoring. And that was my first encounter. The second encounter was up at Shalom Retreat Center. And my sister-in-law, Jan, suggested that I go with her up to this. I didn't suspect this at the time, but I suspected afterwards that I was being recruited when I found out what this group was. Anyway, she was talking, Keo was talking about parent-child relationships, a subject with which she is undoubtedly extremely familiar. And I have to be honest, I have trouble understanding foreigners. You know, when they've got a heavy accent, it's very hard for me to understand them. And in this case, Keo, of course, has an accent. So part of the problem might have been mine, my misunderstanding her. But at the end of her speech, I was left saying, what? You know, what in the hell is she talking about? I don't think she knows, actually to this day, I don't think she knows what she was actually talking about at that particular event, because she only mentioned children once that I heard. And, you know, heavily accented, as I said, so I got nothing out of it. I told Jan Imhoff afterwards, I said, you know, I think she's an idiot. And that did not set too well with Jan, and that's the last time we really talked about this. So I was spared any further experience with her until the final encounter, which was at one of the Unity Masses, again, down at Holy Family Hall, and she gave the sermon, for want of a better term, and again, I couldn't understand what she was saying. Thank God she was speaking for less time than she did up at Shalom, but just rambled, you know. And I sat there with both ears open as best I could get them to try to understand what she was saying, and I couldn't. You know, it just rambled all over the place. That was the third encounter. I gradually became aware of other people that were in this group that I knew or had come to know. The first couple were Jim and Sandy Klinge, who were parishioners up at St. Joe's, and I knew them. Sandy was nice, I thought. Jim was an ass, but, you know.
Don't hold back here, John.
What?
Don't hold back.
No, I won't. I would have said a horse's ass, but that's demeaning to a wonderful animal. Anyway, and then I became aware of Dick and Marilyn Vogt. And I hadn't met Marilyn for quite a while, but I heard about Dick. And the reason I heard about him is because my wife started talking about her spiritual advisor. And she told me his name, Dick Vogt. I don't know, that's interesting. And I started getting a little concerned about that. Now, let me clarify something here. I do not think that there was anything untoward going on there. I don't think that they were having an affair or anything like that. I know my wife, and I don't think she would ever do that. But anyway, I started calling up to the archdiocese, and I said, you know, what are the qualifications to become a spiritual advisor? And priests are allowed, brothers are allowed, nuns are allowed, and special deacons are allowed. But I said, well, you know, what about somebody that's just off the street? And they said, oh no, it's got to be somebody that goes through proper training. He had not. He was a factory worker, And I'm not knocking factory workers, they're fine people sometimes. But in this case, I knew that he had not gone through the training because I asked. You know, I gave him a couple of the names of the people that I knew or had heard about being in this group. You know, well, has Dick Vogt ever gone through the training? Well, just a minute, I'll let you know. And the answer was no, he had not. And I mentioned that to my wife. And about maybe a week later, she came back at me and she said, you know, you really don't have to be suspicious about this. There's nothing going on. I hadn't mentioned that to her. You know, I hadn't even hinted that I thought there might be something funny going on. And as I said, I trusted my wife implicitly. I had no problems with her doing anything like that at all. So anyway, that also kind of put me on the outs with these people because I dared to question the qualifications of one of their members. I began to get worried not only about the spiritual advisor, but the frequency of the meetings. Started off once a month as a prayer group. Then, a little bit later on, went to 2 times a month. Again, you know, still a prayer group. And then it became 4 times a month, every week. And it has now gotten to the point where it's at sometimes 2, 3, even 4 times a week that they'll have something going on, and she will be there. I am very concerned, obviously, because she's gone a lot. We have, at that time, we had young children. Now, as children sometimes do, they grew up. But I came to the realization that this was not an organization that was in my or anybody else's best interest. The final realization came in December 2004. My daughter, my youngest kid, was graduating from 8th grade that year. It was the final Christmas pageant that they were going to have at St. Joe's. St. Joe's closed down as a grade school the next year. Last time that my wife would have a chance to see my daughter perform in this Christmas pageant. Now, I was there, of course. My 2 sons were there. My nephew on my wife's side was there. He was my daughter's godchild, or godfather. Her godmother came from Hanover, Illinois. Not even a Catholic, mind you. She came from Hanover, Illinois to witness this. My mother-in-law was there. A couple of other relatives were there. Jan Imhoff was not, and neither was my wife. She had a meeting that night. Well, I talked it over with Emily, and she's okay with it. No, she was not. She said she was. She was not. We've discussed it a few times since then, and she was not okay with it. She felt that her mother should be there. And that was what started me realizing that I had lost my wife. And that's also when I started getting more involved with groups that were fighting against this group, the church itself, meeting Donna again. Donna and I went way, way back to grade school. We slept in the same geometry class together in grade school. And believe me, some of the nuns, sleep was a wonderful option. But my concern now is that to all intents and purposes, my wife is dead. You know, we're still living in the same house. We're there, but it's not the same woman. The woman that I married, the woman that I knew, celebrated 25 years with before this all happened, is not the same woman that's in my home today. It's like one of the Hollywood horror flicks from back in the 50s, zombie apocalypse or, you know, invasion of the body snatchers. Somehow or other, some alien came down and is inhabiting this body of this woman. She is no longer my wife. My wife is dead. And unfortunately, I have no alternatives anymore. You know, I don't believe in adultery, so I'm kind of left out there, and she's going her merry way 3, 4, 5 times a week, and I'm wondering what the hell happened and where I went wrong, or where she went wrong. But so anyway, that's the story, and that's where we are today. I wish I could say wonderful news, happy ending, but it didn't happen. So
Thank you. Thank you, John. Does, that's a gut-wrenching story. There are others like that, and it's just horrible, absolutely horrible. Does anybody have any questions for John? Oh, Jan Imhoff. What about Jan?
I don't know if Jan Imhoff is still in the group. She's no longer living in Dubuque. She sold her house a couple years ago. Mike Imhoff, her husband, died a few years ago of cancer. Unfortunately, he was a nice guy, even if he was in the group. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Jan. She's a decent person. She just, you know, she was in the group. I don't think she is now, but I don't see her very much anymore. I try not to see any of the others either.
We think Jan is out of it. However, she was very high in the leadership, in the hierarchy of the cult. So it would be unusual, but you know, there are some stories. I won't go into those because I don't want to get into names, specific names. But at this point, we think that physically she's not in it, but obviously mentally she still would be, in terms of, is the mind control there yet? Sure, sure. Anything else for John? Oh, yes. Jim, go ahead.
How many people attend the weekly meetings? How large of a group is currently involved locally?
Well,
I have no idea how big the group is. Okay, I have no idea how big the group is locally. I know there are other people in it. I'd seen some, and I had mentioned before about my son dying. At the funeral, there were a large number of people that came up and would talk to my wife first. And when she introduced them, if they were people that she worked with, she would say, well, this is Angie. I work with her. This is so-and-so. I went to school with her. If it was a member of the cult, she just said, this is a friend. And there were a lot of them. If everybody that was introduced was a friend, it's a large group. I have met very few of them because I tend to stay away from the people that I think are in it. You know, even in groups that I'm in, if I know that they're involved in any way, shape, or form, I stay away from them. And maybe that's wrong on my part, but I really don't think so.
Okay.
My wife has a regular job. My wife has a regular job that she does during the day. And however, with the job she has, she gets a fair amount of time off. She's been there for a long time, almost 40 years. And when she takes time off from the group, a lot of times it is to do, quote, unquote, mission work, which might include cleaning some of their apartment buildings or something like that. And frankly, I'm tempted to get her to, to sell my house to the cult in the hopes that maybe she'd clean it.
That's awesome. John is saying that was not intended as a joke, but that was funny. It's like, okay, I want to take a couple of minutes here. Somebody asked about the numbers. there's no way John would know in terms of how many are at each of those meetings his wife is going to, because that's where the secrecy comes in. I'm sure John does not even know where those meetings are. Is that correct? You don't know where her meetings are when your wife goes to a meeting.
I suspect that they are at the home of Dick and Marilyn Vogt, but I do not know that for sure.
Yeah, they actually,
Just because of things she's let slip over the years, that's what I suspect. But no idea for sure.
right, right. Right, right. And yeah, absolutely, and that's what I was going to share. That I would say, first I want to jump on the, how many do we think? I would say there are probably about 150 cult members in this area, add another 150 in Chicago. It's not a large cult, but they're very dedicated to it. And this lady is absolutely correct. The meetings are held at various homes throughout the area, so lots of little meetings here, there, and everywhere, not just at the votes. So I don't know all where, but obviously other members' homes. Let's see, that was one. Okay, donating the money. If they are living in Chicago as part of the, becoming a sister, they turn over all their wages to the group. If they're living at home, like my sister and brother-in-law live in Dubuque, they do not. They're retired now, but they did work. They would not turn all the money over. Certainly, they would donate a huge percentage to the cult, and hence the $1 million worth of land that they gave them. There's not a lot of success, and again, a lot of that legitimacy within the Catholic Church. They have come out and spoken against them, but you have at Nativity Dick Vogt, other names that I won't mention, who are on the altar. They give communion, they disperse communion, they're sacristans, altar boys, you name it, they are. So what does that say to me? That's a huge disconnect between what is actually happening and the words of warning from the Catholic Church. They're saying basically stay away from that group, yet here they are on the altar. Disconnect. You can't have it both ways. And so I'm hoping there are some priests here today, probably not, but my God, the thing, lots needs to be done. They need to be off that altar immediately. And people need to speak up to their parishes, speak up to your local priests, get them off the altar. You're telling me to stay away from them, stay away from Love, Holy Trinity, Blessed Mission, but what is a group? Members comprise a group. So no, don't have them in positions of authority in the Catholic Church yet. And there are many that still are. I think that was it. Any other question? Is divorce not an option for you, John?
I'm sorry?
Divorce not an option for you?
Well, yes, I could do that. It would be expensive, and the way the courts are, she would probably get everything, which means that the cult would get it. So, at this point, I really don't believe in divorce anyway. I mean, I know in some instances it's beneficial, but I don't know. It's something, yes, it's crossed the table a few times, but, murder is an option too, but I'm really not interested in going that way. At some point, I might get desperate enough to do that, but
Which one?
Which one? Yeah, which one?
I refuse to answer on the grounds that it may tend to incriminate me.
Oh my God. Yeah, exactly. We're talking about viable options, John. Oh, I know it has been a rough morning. This is difficult to speak to these things because your family is just ripped apart, no matter who you. Oh, hi. Oh God. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So now it's time for us to move on. So the dude down here at the end, is Aaron Smith-Levin. He's an ex-Scientologist. He was on the season 1, episode 6 of Leah Remini, Scientology and the Aftermath. And I thought, he has a really compelling story. So being the dork that I am, I said to Larry, let's fly to Clearwater and meet him. And we did. And I asked Aaron, would you ever come to Iowa to speak? And he said, yes. And I thought, awesome, absolutely awesome. So we have Aaron here, and his story is amazing. And we were commiserating over the time factor. It's not easy to cover everything in this short period of time. So whatever he does, listen up, because he's got a great story. And passing it on, this is Aaron Smith-Levin.
Hi, everyone. I have to get used to this. Well, thank you all for coming out today. And I assume that most of you are here more out of familiarity with the LHTBM organization. And I don't know how many of you have any familiarity with Scientology at all, or have seen the show, or are wondering, why do we got a Scientology guy here today? But the thing is, all these organizations are the same on a certain level. And in the deck that you prepared, where it goes over all the traits of a cult, you know, if I was still in Scientology and I read down that list, I know that my reaction would, I'd read that and I'd go, oh, you know what, this isn't fair. I know. Some former member just picked all the things about our organization they didn't like, and they put it on a list of things that make you a cult. That's BS. You know, no one who's in a cult thinks they're in a cult. There are not any Scientologists who think they are in a cult. I guarantee you none of the members of LHTBM think they're in a cult. So what makes it a cult? And so let me see. I promise I'm not playing on my phone. I just have some notes here. I think when I hear the stories that I've heard so far of LHTBM, what jumps out at me the most, and for me, what makes a cult dangerous, is not the crazy beliefs or the practices. You can find that anywhere. It comes down to when you have a system of beliefs that eventually leads to the destruction of the family unit. It's not about what you believe, it's not about what you practice. It's when you're involved in an organization and the story that they're selling you, and it happens slowly, you know, when you eventually get to the point where you feel that your organization or your organization's goal is more important than anything else in your life, including your parents, your kids, that for me is what makes either a cult, or at least makes a cult dangerous. You know, I don't know, are all cults dangerous? I don't know. I don't know. But when you actually get to study these organizations, they're all the same. Jonestown. God, I read a book on Jonestown recently. It blew my mind. I was like, it might as well be about L. Ron Hubbard and the Sea Organization. They all felt like they were doing, or, you know, they all felt they were involved in something important and were doing great work, and it leads to travesty. So Donna and I have been talking about this event for, I don't know, at least a year and a half maybe, a year plus, and I tend to procrastinate a lot. And it wasn't until like a week ago, I was like, hey, Donna, we should talk. What do you want me to say? What would you like me to speak about? And she said, just tell your story. Just tell your story. I was like, okay, well, that's easy. I do, by the way, public speaking does make me a little nervous, so I'm processing as I'm going here. I frequently interview other second and third generation Scientologists. Scientology's only been around since like the early 50s, but there are already third and fourth generation Scientologists. And I interview them all the time. I have a YouTube channel called Growing Up in Scientology where I post these interviews. And we just barely scratch the surface of people's stories, and we will still speak for hours. There's one friend of mine, his name's Nathan. We have almost 13 hours of interview posted on my channel already, and we could talk for 13 more. So when it comes to telling my story, I have a general outline, And if you guys have questions, and as I'm speaking, feel free to shout them out. I can't possibly cover it all, but I'm gonna do my best, okay? So part of my story was featured in season 1 of Scientology and the Aftermath. And the episode focused on me and my twin brother. And due to the this is why I end up actually not talking about on my channel. I focus on interviewing others because it's easier. Just bear with me. It'll be fine. No rush. So when it's okay. I'll tackle that, I promise. Okay, in 2000, I'm going to try not to talk so much about my brother because it's almost impossible. But in 2003, he passed away in a car accident. And we were identical twins. And because of Scientology's disconnection policy, which is that once someone is basically kicked out of Scientology, you're not allowed to talk to them anymore. And you're not allowed to see them, and you're not allowed to talk to them. And I hadn't seen him, when he died, I was 23. I'm 37 now. I had not seen him in 5 years. When he passed away. And, what was that, 15 years ago? It doesn't get any easier. And people can say whatever they want about Scientology or whether people are free to believe what they want to believe. And of course, I agree. People are free to believe what they want to believe, and people can be Scientologists if they want to be Scientologists. But why is it dangerous? Because like all of these other high-control groups, Scientologists will, without question, eventually arrive at the point where Scientology is more important than family. And there's many reasons for that. It's not just because they think Scientology is doing such great things. It has to do with the story of Scientology and what Scientologists believe about the nature of reality and the nature of existence and the nature of us as spiritual beings and what this world really is and what this planet really is and what this solar system really is. That it breaks down people's concepts of their family relationships into, it's meaningless. These are just bags of flesh. These are just meat bodies. And you're a spiritual being who's been alive for trillions of years, and I'm a spiritual being that's been alive for trillions of years. And just because, if a mother says, just because I gave birth to my child, well, you didn't give birth to that spirit, you just gave birth to the body. So the parent-child relationship eventually becomes completely meaningless. And there's nothing that's more important than Scientology. The episode did have a little lighthearted moment at the end. I swear to God, this is a true story. My Scientologist neighbor, when she found out that me and my wife had officially been kicked out, and by the way, I don't know if your organization does this, the LHTBM. Even if you leave Scientology on your own, once they realize they cannot get you back, they kick you out so they can say you were expelled. So I left Scientology long before I was officially kicked out. But once they officially kick you out, that's when nobody can associate with you anymore. So my Scientologist neighbor, when she found out that my wife and I had both officially been kicked out, she called my wife and left a voicemail and said, okay, well, let's discuss how we're going to handle the disconnection with your kids, because our kids would always go over to her house and play, but I don't want to disconnect from the dog. Now, if you've seen my dog, you would fully understand that. Makes perfect sense. The kids, they will totally understand. The dog will not understand. Okay. All right. So let me just start from the beginning. I was about 4 years old when my mom was introduced to Scientology by a friend of hers up in Philadelphia. And, she jumped in with 2 feet. And she joined staff at the local Church of Scientology pretty much right away. So for me, from age 4 to, let's say, age 12, Scientology was something that existed in the background. It's something that we were aware of. It's not like Christianity or Catholicism, where kids can go to church and participate just as much as maybe an adult participates. Scientology doesn't really have sermons or services in a traditional sense. So we didn't really do Scientology as kids. We were kind of exposed to it, maybe a little communications course here or a little how to study course there, but nothing serious. Then in 1993, Scientology was granted a tax exemption by the IRS again. Scientologists don't actually know that it used to have tax exemption before they took it away because they proved L. Ron Hubbard was using the money for his own personal gain. Okay, so 1993, Scientology gets tax exemption, and it's like a huge watershed moment in Scientology, and there's a huge push to recruit new staff members. So my mom had left staff a few years prior just due to family and work commitments. It just got too much. And so the solution was, let's just all join staff, right? So by all, that means me, at this time I'm 12, okay. Me and my brother, my mom's husband, my stepbrother, my stepsister, my mom's friend's husband, and their 2 sons. 10 of us. We had all been doing like a homeschool group that year. I went to public school up until through the 6th grade. For 7th grade, I did homeschool in this group I just described. The 7th grade was the end of any form of formal education that I have. I don't have a high school diploma. I don't have a GED. I didn't go to college. So after the 7th grade was over, all 10 of us joined staff at the local Church of Scientology. Now look, I don't mean we volunteered at the church for a few hours a week. I mean, it's what we did. It was our full-time jobs. I know it sounds crazy. How do you have 12-year-olds working? It's just the way it was. So pretty quickly, can you hold this for a second? Just need to get a sip of water. All right. There we go. Okay, so pretty quickly, we just finished kind of some introductory staff courses in Philadelphia. And then we all went down to Clearwater, Florida, where the biggest church of Scientology in the world is down in Clearwater. It's called Flag. I'll spare you the history lesson for why it's called Flag. So I studied and worked full-time from 1993 to 1996 down in Clearwater. And the interesting part, some of the best 3 years of my life. Had a great time, And that's one of the things that allows these organizations to, in some cases, continue to recruit members and to continue to exist, is that the people are good people. There's a lot to like, Otherwise, people wouldn't stay. And even though I wasn't in formal school or anything, it's hard for me to say I wasn't actually learning anything. And there was people there from all over the world. So they're like, wow, this is an amazing thing. That Scientology is huge all over the world. Okay, so 3 years full-time studying down at Flag. That's from the age 13, 14, and 15. And then I finished my training. I'll spare you all the descriptions and definitions. Then went back to the organization in Philadelphia, worked there full-time. And when I say full-time, I mean, look, I'm 15 years old at this point. I'm living in South Jersey, getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning, taking a bus into downtown Philly, working there until 10 o'clock at night, taking a bus home at 10:20 p.m. by myself. My mom's still in Florida at this point when I went back to Philadelphia. 7 days a week. I was happy to do it. I was happy to do it. If you had told me I was in a cult, I would have spit on you. You know, there's such a sense of value when you believe in the story of Scientology and when you believe in what auditing, Scientology auditing is like their form of counseling, when you believe what it accomplishes, and my job in the church was to train Scientology auditors. You have such a feeling of self-worth and self-importance that when you see people protesting your organization or picketing your organization or complaining about how they're treated in this organization, none of those things ever made me doubt what I was doing. Nothing ever made me doubt the importance of what I was doing. And one thing I noticed in your slide deck, and I really should read some more of those authors because I read those things and I go, that's what I've been saying, is that there's almost nothing you can say to someone in these groups that would make them go, oh yeah, you're right. Why didn't I think of that? They have to be pushed past their own breaking point, whatever that is for them. I like that, the sentence about the shelf upon which they had stacked all of the rationalizations for their cognitive dissonance finally falls off the wall. So after 3 years working at the Philadelphia org, I said, screw this. I got better things to do with my time. And I moved to Los Angeles and basically took 2 years off of Scientology. And that was interesting. But I also had no association with Scientologists during that time. And I had very limited contact with my mom. I hadn't been officially kicked out, but I was just on like almost a little self-imposed hiatus. I didn't do anything bad enough to be officially kicked out. And this might get a little bit too into the weeds here, but when you work for Scientology, not just being a Scientologist, when you work for Scientology, you don't have to pay for your Scientology services unless you don't finish your contract, in which case you owe full price and then some. So at the age of 15, when I took my little 2-year break, I was handed a bill for $100,000. And they didn't have to tell me this because I already knew this. And you're basically not considered a Scientologist in good standing until you pay this off. And you can't do any more Scientology until you pay this off. And it's not like I ever thought I was going to pay it off. That's why I was like, I'm on a hiatus, you know, which is not a real word in Scientology. I'm just speaking in normal words. Okay. Well, I was with my brother, and you have to understand, Scientology got me to the point where I felt like I was Superman. I was the shit. Pardon my French. I wasn't scared of living in the big bad world. I felt like, you know, I was the one who had the upper hand over everybody else. Scientology is a very egocentric operation. But after 2 years, I was like, man, I don't see where this is going in the next 10 years. I feel like I'm kind of at a dead end. You know, it's just kind of spinning my wheels here. And I went back. I went back to Philadelphia to finish my contract. I had 2 years left on the contract so that I wouldn't have this debt to Scientology, so that I could then feel free to move on from there and just maybe just be a normal public Scientologist or whatever. I hadn't thought it too far ahead. I just had to get rid of that debt. So I went back and I worked another 2 years. And when there was like 2 months left on my contract, I was so close to freedom. Some long-lost friends of mine who were my same age, had also grown up in the Philadelphia org, and had gone off and joined the Sea Org at a very young age, and had moved up to become some pretty senior executives within Scientology's Sea organization. Now the Sea Org, or the Sea organization, is like the central command of Scientology. All of church management is our Sea Org members. And all that means, they're the guys who've signed the billion-year contracts. They're the guys who have the Navy-looking uniforms. They're the guys who live in church housing. Like, they don't have regular jobs. They just work for Scientology. 110 hours a week, 52 weeks a year. Okay, so just before my contract in Philadelphia was over, two of these friends of mine came back to Philadelphia for a family wedding, and they found out that my contract was up, and they gave me the pitch. They gave me the pitch. They knew that earlier, when I had spent those 3 years down in Clearwater studying, I had really, really wanted to join the Sea organization. Very, very much so. Anyway, I swallowed it. I swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. I had a house, I had a car, I had a job and a fiance. Just took them a week to handle all that. And I was in Los Angeles and signed that billion-year contract and joined the Sea organization. And I was a Sea Org member from 2002 to 2006. And it was not much fun. And, you know, despite the billion-year contract, after a couple of years, I was like, nah, this is not going to last for a billion years. This is not going to last for 5 years, much less a billion. And so, but I did meet my, who is now and still my wife. She was actually worked in the Sea organization for 15 years out in Los Angeles. And we got married. And it was an unspoken thing between the two of us where we were like, this isn't working. Not us, the Sea Org thing. Like, this isn't working. Older Sea Org members were being just kicked to the curb instead of being taken care of. I could go on and on and on about how it wasn't working, but we sort of had this unspoken thing. And both of us also, I don't think either of us were really up to admitting to anyone else that we really wanted to leave. Now, in the Sea organization, you're not allowed to have children. Scientologists can have children, but Sea Org members cannot. And when Sea Org members get pregnant, they either have to get an abortion or they have to leave. Now, it just sounds so heartless, but Scientologists have no, I mean, I know people in the Sea Org. Keep in mind, the Sea organization is supposed to be composed of people who Scientologists say are the most ethical beings on the planet. I know of one person who, by the time she was 30, had 5 abortions in the Sea Org. Oh, Scientology won't pay for it. You have to pay for it. They just tell you have to do it. Now, how does someone who makes $50 a week, imagine you make $50 a week, you're working 110 hours a week, they give you $50 a week, and they're like, they're not even going to pay for your medical care. I mean, anyway, it's a little ridiculous. We did not have an abortion. So when my wife was pregnant, we now have 3 kids. When we knew for sure my wife was pregnant, we had a little miniature party, which was just having some sushi and some Diet Coke in our room. That's a party in the Sea Org. And the next morning, we went to muster. There's a lot of military terms used in the Sea Org. Muster is, you know, if everyone's being honest, it's just to make sure no one escaped overnight. And afterwards, I went right down to see the master at arms, the ethics officer. I said, Heather's pregnant, we're not getting an abortion. Now, we expected to get all this pressure to get the abortion because we knew, that was just the standard operating procedure. What we didn't know is that, pardon my French, shit was already going down in the courts. There was already a lot of blowback against the church for pressuring people to get abortions. We didn't know that. Sea Org members do not watch TV. They do not read the newspapers. They do not have cell phones for the most part. They're not allowed to even have computers. And so instead of giving us a hard time, they said, okay, and then gave me the piece of paper that gives the steps you have to do to properly leave the Sea Org with permission. They wanted us out of there so fast. It was a blessing. Some people, it can take 6-12 months of hanging around waiting to go through essentially what is an interrogation to find out all of your hidden crimes against the organization. And only once they are convinced you have confessed all do they give you their blessing to leave, give you $500 for your trip home, and a bill. I got another bill. I got another bill. This time it was only for $50,000. And okay. All right, let me consult my notes and see where I'm at in this story. Okay, so this was in 2000. How are we doing on time? Okay, this was in 2006 when we left the Sea Org. Now, we only left the Sea Org. We didn't leave Scientology in 2006. So my mom was still in the Philadelphia area, but she was working full-time. My wife's folks had moved to Clearwater. My wife had been in the Sea Org for 15 years. While she was in the Sea Org, her folks moved to Clearwater. And they were basically already retirement age. And so we said, okay, let's go to Clearwater. It's nice, your folks are there, we can stay with them, and when the baby's born, we'll, go back to Philadelphia or something. And so then we moved to Clearwater, and this is, I'm going to give you an example of how things went for us, because it's also an example of why it can be so hard for people to leave something like Scientology. Within the community of Scientology, if you are in good standing and people think you're a good guy, there's lots of support. There's lots of people with businesses who can give you jobs. There's lots of friends. There's lots of kids. It's like, it's a self-contained little ecosystem. So, my in-laws, their neighbor was a Scientologist who owned a business consulting firm, and they used L. Ron Hubbard management technology to consult physical therapy practices. And one of the things I did do while in the Sea Org was get very thoroughly trained in L. Ron Hubbard's management philosophies and policies and systems. So I was basically offered a job sight unseen and became, one of the head business consultants at this firm. So, I'm coming right out of the Sea Org, and boom, I land into a job that's, paying me more than I need to pay the bills. Couldn't be happier. It was easy work. So it's like, even this experience, for some people, it's very traumatic when they leave the Sea Org if they don't have a support network. Whereas my wife and I, when we left the Sea Org, there was a support network. So one job led to another job, which led to higher paying jobs, and eventually my wife gets a job working for a Scientologist. I'm working for a Scientologist. My kids are in a private Scientology school. All of our friends are Scientologists. And the beginning of the end for me was in 2009 when the Tampa Bay Times, at that time it was the St. Petersburg Times, wrote a series of newspaper articles interviewing former high-level Scientology executives from the Sea organization who had left/escaped. Scientology's international management headquarters is out in Hemet, California, in the middle of a desert tucked into the side of a mountain. And it is, in some ways, a fortress. And again, I say this stuff and I realize how crazy it sounds. The people who are in this fortress don't feel like they're the prisoners. It doesn't even cross their mind. Are they allowed to leave? No. That's an example of cognitive dissonance. Okay, so yeah, we're surrounded by razor wire fence and we can't leave, but are we prisoners? Nope. Try to convince them that they are. You will not succeed. So the high level, and this is called the INT base, the International Management Base. The people on this INT base, a handful of them were very prominent public figures who addressed the entire Scientology public at these international, televised events 5 or 6 times a year. I mean, they're the most famous people in Scientology, aside from like Tom Cruise and stuff. It's the most famous people in Scientology. And so these people escaped, and nobody knew it. It's not like they send out a memo to all the Scientologists letting them know that this senior manager has left. No, they just kind of delete him off the website, and you don't see him anymore, and for all you know, he's just on a special secret project. Okay. I'm mentioning this because these are people I had looked up to for my entire life. They were my opinion leaders. They were the epitome of everything Scientology was supposed to stand for, competence. These were the guys getting the show on the road. Okay, so I'm trying to give as much context because it might seem weird that something like a newspaper article was like the thing that was the beginning of the end for me. So these former managers that were being interviewed in these series of newspaper articles, they were talking about the conditions at the INT base. And they were talking about the physical abuse that was happening at the INT base. And that David Miscavige, who's the head of Scientology, he's the ecclesiastical leader. L. Ron Hubbard is what everything is based on, but David Miscavige runs the show. That he's just beating the shit out of people. He's locking people up. He took a couple double wide trailers that used to be some conference rooms and some management offices, and he had bars welded on the windows and bars welded on the doors, and had a couple hundred Scientology managers locked up in there, sleeping on the floor under their desks, and you're like, what the F? Is this what? My whole Scientology career, I had wanted nothing more than to be promoted to the INT base. I knew what post I wanted. I knew what rank I wanted. I just wanted to get there. And so to hear that, and in the Sea Org, my experience was that there was a lot of just terrible conditions, just terrible staff who weren't there for the right reasons, and people mistreating each other, and bad justice and bad management. And I had always explained it all away by saying, the reason it's this bad here is because we're too far from international management. Management just doesn't know this is all going on, or they're too busy handling more important stuff. And what dawned on me when I read these articles was, no, man, that was just the trickle-down effect. It was worse at international management. So I say that's the beginning of the end, because it's not because that alone shook my belief. That's what got me going, oh, something's not right. Something is much different than the way I have been thinking things are. It was very electrifying. It was kind of exciting to, oh my God, this is crazy. But it didn't yet shake my belief in the ultimate promise of Scientology. But I started to reach out to some of these former executives, and I started to talk to them, just casually and openly and very frankly. And it was one of these executives who, again, for me, was like, I know this is a loaded word, so I don't mean it that way. I thought this guy was a god. I mean, this guy had known L. Ron Hubbard. This guy had been personally coached by L. Ron Hubbard in various auditing procedures and communication drills. This one executive that I'm referring to had actually kind of been anointed by L. Ron Hubbard as one of the perfect examples of a Scientology auditor. And I knew this guy knew what he was talking about. Now I realized that in my notes I've skipped over the part where I give you the 5-minute version of what Scientologists believe, and I don't think I'm going to do that right now. But I will say that Scientology has what they call their bridge to total freedom. And the longer I spend out of Scientology, the cheesier that sounds. And Scientology has a counseling procedure called auditing. And the auditing procedures are done in a sequential sequence, and Scientology has like a poster. And it's a poster, it lays out all of the levels of auditing that you can do and all of the classes of auditor training that you can do. And on the lower part of the bridge, that's the stuff that all Scientologists are allowed to know about. It's not confidential. You can walk into any church of Scientology and you can open up some books that explain what that auditing is and how to do it. But everything, so you have the lower part of the bridge, and then you're supposed to go clear, which means you have, it basically, and I'm dumbing this down, you basically get rid of your subconscious mind that is the source of your pain and suffering. And then you have the upper half, the confidential half of the bridge to total freedom. And those auditing actions are called the OT levels, the operating Thetan levels. Thetan is what Scientologists call the spirit. And operating Thetan just means you're a badass Thetan. So part of the Scientology beliefs is that as spiritual beings, we are all essentially natively godlike. You know, like just think Marvel, superhuman. Creating planets and universes and destroying them at will with your mind. And so that's what we all were trillions of years ago, and we have forgotten that that's what we were, and we now think we're bodies, we think we live on this earth. We think our life is dependent on our body. Scientologists believe, Scientologist concept of the spirit is that you've been alive for trillions of years and you simply cannot die. They don't believe in the afterlife per se. They just believe that you're just always in this life. So like if this gentleman keeled over right now of a heart attack, sorry, I'm not implying anything.
I'll fall towards you.
That as a Thetan, he would just pop out of the back of his head and be like, what the hell just happened? And he'd be really confused for a while. He'd get sucked up to an electronic implant station on the far side of the moon, have his Thetan memory wiped, and then be shot back down to the local maternity ward where he would find a brand new little baby body and just jump right into it and live a new life and forget all of that. So Scientologists believe that once you get through all these levels of auditing, you basically get to short circuit that whole process. You become aware of what happens in the between lives area. Oh, you know how when people have out-of-body experiences, they say, go to the light? Don't go to the light, that's the implant station. That's the implant station. And they also believe that when you're at the implant station, that's where they give you these electronic, they call them implants, that make you susceptible to want to believe in the major religions, because that helps just keep the people on earth controlled and complacent and not realize they're in a trap. Scientology, and only Scientology, can get you out of that trap. That's one of these things. Everyone believes their way is the way. So these OT levels, before L. Ron Hubbard passed away, OT levels 1 through 8 were released were all available to do. The funny thing is that once you do OT levels 1 through 8, I've never met an OT 8 that I thought was anything special at all. And that was something that we talk about, the cognitive dissonance. That was something that always sat with me during my whole time in Scientology. I had almost no auditing personally, and I knew plenty of people who had done the entire bridge to total freedom. And I'm like, this guy's just as much of a douche as anyone else I know. I mean, literally. I've never met an OT8 that impressed me. I'm like, okay, well, if that's what we're here for, but, you know, how do I make sense of the fact that none of these guys seem special in any way? There's an answer for that. Scientologists believe, and L. Ron Hubbard said that before he passed away, he fully researched and wrote up and compiled and codified up to OT15. And they're just sitting in a vault waiting to be released at the right time. It's been 30 years. Yeah. So why am I explaining all of this? Because this gentleman, this executive, who I, for many, many years, had thought, man, this guy, if there's anybody who's at least read those materials, it's this guy. He said, there's nothing. He's like, it doesn't exist. And again, it's funny telling this story because you're like, that's what got you? Everything else was good? No, this is just one of those things where it's the carrot. You're always chasing the carrot. You never meet anyone who's ever achieved what Scientology and groups like it claim they're going to help you achieve. But there's always the explanation for why no one seems to achieve it, and then the carrot for what will finally get you there. This idea that I had and that all Scientologists have, that there's at least 7 unreleased OT levels, and those are the real winners. And that L. Ron Hubbard had finished all those levels, and that's why he didn't die of a stroke. He dropped his body causatively. His body, this is what Scientologists were told, his body, his physical entity that he was just occupying, was now serving as a hindrance to his further research. And he had already written up and left behind OT levels up to 15. Some of the old versions of the bridge go up to 22. Oh yeah, those are the good ones. And so Scientologists believe that all this magical stuff is just sitting in a vault waiting for the right time. And this guy said, there's nothing. And if we had more time, I could give you the whole amazing story of how even David Miscavige didn't know there was nothing until after Hubbard died and David Miscavige was working his way to the top. And these guys fought for control of the church mercilessly. And he orchestrated this fake FBI coup to justify raiding the storage area where these confidential materials were supposedly being held, protected by a gentleman named Pat Broker. And they took everything. Miscavige and his henchmen took everything, loaded up in a truck, drove it away, went through every shred of paper looking for these magical notes L. Ron Hubbard left behind for these advanced OT levels. Not a thing. And so imagine how disappointed he was, right? So for me, even though, I was raised in Scientology, I never had to make a conscious decision to join. It was more like, I assume everyone has their own personal experiences if you were raised in a religion where you don't necessarily have to go, do I believe this? And I'll speak for myself. I don't go, do I believe this? I go, how can I explain why I believe this? Like, that's what a lot of my Scientology studying was for me. It was sort of, I wanted to be able to have a good answer if someone challenged me about it, but I didn't really care whether I really believed it. That makes me sound kind of superficial. But, as you're growing up in it, it's not like you're fighting it every step of the way. It's more like, oh, I'm supposed to believe this now? Oh, crap, that's a hard one. How do I explain why? Okay, fine, I'll believe it, but how do I explain why? And a lot of those funny pieces of why do I explain? How do I explain to someone why we care so much about what L. Ron Hubbard has to say? Why can't you pick and choose the things L. Ron Hubbard says that you want to agree with? Well, L. Ron Hubbard also claimed to have been the reincarnation of Buddha. And I was like, oh, that's a good answer. People like Buddha. So, for me, finding out from someone I knew that there was no more OT levels, I was like, well, why the hell didn't you say that in the first place? That's all it took for me. For me, it was, oh, I used to believe this stuff. I used to do things that I thought were valuable and helpful because I believed this stuff. And now I no longer believe it. I'm not filled with regret for the time that I spent in Scientology. Luckily, I, left at a reasonable age. I'm not embarrassed that I ever believed in Scientology. One of the reasons I find value in talking about it and having a public conversation about what do Scientologists really believe, how do they get to the point where they can look themselves in the mirror and actually believe these things, is that I think if people if people have the idea that you have to be stupid or crazy to get wrapped up in one of these cults, then you haven't done that person any help if you've left them with the impression it could never happen to them or someone they know. Because if they have that idea, then they and the people around them are still susceptible to falling into one of those traps. If you just pick up, this is going to sound ridiculous, but if you just pick up a basic book on Scientology and you start reading it, I wouldn't be surprised if you go, well, what's the big deal? This sounds pretty reasonable. It does. That's why people get in. People get in, and even when they get in a little deeper, they're still perfectly well-intentioned, well-meaning people. It happens very slowly when eventually you're so enmeshed in it, that eventually it gets to a point where even if you want to leave, you don't feel that you can. And unfortunately, one of the things that is hard for me is knowing that my wife is the one who has really suffered more than I have. Because, and this will probably get me to my last talking points here, is after these articles were written, my mom was reading them as well, and her reaction was the same as mine, like, oh shit, this is not good. And she talked about it with other Scientologists who basically turned her in, and then I'm giving the short version. And then she got kicked out, and then I was told, well, and keep in mind, this is after already having lost my brother, which was, of course, hard for me, but I'd have to say harder for my mom. And after all that, they still come to me and say, well, you can never see your mom again, or you're going to be kicked out. And, you know, as these things go, instead of just saying, go screw yourself, you know, I had my job, my wife had her job. Long story short, I lied my ass off for like 2 years. Well, and what I mean by that is, I pretended like I had disconnected from my mom, and I told them I had disconnected from my mom, and I came up with a brilliantly concocted, elaborate, emotional story of how I had disconnected from my mom, because I wasn't going to disconnect from my mom. But I did want to keep my job and my friends and my family, and I knew that no matter how I personally felt about all of this, there was still my wife and her family to worry about. It wasn't just about me. But I wasn't willing to disconnect from my mom. And I knew that at the end of the road, there was no way to have it both ways. I knew it wasn't possible, but I was going to try as long as I could. And, you know, eventually I was turned in by one of my friends that I was still seeing my mom. And I lied my ass off again. I just delayed the inevitable for as long as possible. Until eventually they knew, we can't trust this guy. He's just going to keep lying to us. And I'm like, yeah, as long as you keep telling me I can never see my mom again, that's about as much as you're going to get from me. But they're like, all right, fine, we can't trust a thing this guy says. Let's kick him out. And then they go to my wife. And they say, well, you got to divorce your husband, or you're going to get kicked out. That was not a good day for my wife. And she's like, you know, her response to them, she can't make an emotional response. She can't be like, I love my husband. Scientologists don't give a damn about love. It's meaningless. Anyway. So she's like, well, we have 3 kids. We have 3 kids. Even if we get divorced, he's still going to be an anti-Scientologist, and I'll be the Scientologist, and I still won't be allowed to get auditing because I'll be connected to him and because he'll be the bad guy. And then when the kids grow up, they'll hate Scientology, and her whole thing was, your plan doesn't work. All right, but at the end of the day, she's like, I'm not divorcing my husband. So they're like, all right, well, you're kicked out. But then they go to her family. And she has 3 siblings who are all, two siblings who are both married. She has 3 siblings, 2 of whom are Scientologists, married to other Scientologists with their own children. And one of her siblings, this is where it gets really creepy. I mean, I know it's all creepy, you guys, but one of her siblings is not a Scientologist. He is married to someone who is not a Scientologist, and they still had to disconnect from us because both of their parents are Scientologists, and they said, if you're talking to Aaron and Heather, we'll disconnect from you in a heartbeat. Who the fuck says that to their kids? Excuse my language. And so my wife is the one who has to deal with every day. Her parents live 2 miles down the street from us. We haven't seen them in years. We have 3 daughters, 11 years old, 11, 9, and 7. And the day that Heather had to explain to them that the reason they weren't allowed to see their grandparents anymore was because they were in Scientology and we weren't, was a bad day. And you can see why, for me, the overarching point, if there is one single overarching point, like, what's the big deal? These bullshit belief systems that get people to a point where they think their own family just does not mean anything. That's dangerous. That is dangerous. And to me, that is what makes a cult a cult. You know, even in the Christian faith, I have heard Christian ministers preach something along the lines of, do not run away from having your faith tested or questioned. How do you know the strength of your faith if you're not willing to have it tested or questioned? You should not feel the need to run away from such things. Take it head on. If it makes you doubt something, well, it's testing your faith. You can either come through it with a stronger and have more resolve in your faith, or not. It's the process. The process matters. Groups like Scientology are the opposite, and that's one of the red flags that I noticed in the deck that you put together. Creating this paradigm, if you're with us, you're the good guys. If you're not with us, you're the bad guys. Scientology uses that same rhetoric, going to the dark side. They use that same language. Hey, well, whatever happened to Joe? Oh, he went to the dark side. Yeah. All right, yeah, and then, okay, that was my final point. That was my final point. Thank you, guys. Any questions, or do you have time for questions? You want me to answer as a Scientologist would? Some people go, don't the Scientologists realize he was just a science fiction author? Isn't that a red flag? No. They love the fact that he was a science fiction author. In fact, how Hubbard spun this is that the fact that he had done all of this research and had full total recall of his last 76 trillion years is why he was able to be such a prolific science fiction writer. He was just writing from his memories. That's not a deal breaker, y'all.
Frank is telling us we have to move out from here, from the theater. We can hang out a little bit in the lobby, and after a couple photos and that with Aaron, he'll be out to chat with everybody before he leaves for Chicago. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much for coming. And I need to thank my husband, who has lived with me for, oh my goodness, quite a while, where I am totally in a zone working on this cult stuff, and it's not necessarily a happy place to be. And he has been so amazingly patient with me. So thank you, Larry. I love you. Thank you, John, for speaking. Aaron Smith-Levin, thank you so much. Thank you. And we'll try to catch you guys out there after a couple photos, okay? Thank you.